Welcome to Discovery Class. We've been studying the book of Genesis, and I've been taking you through the life of a man named Joseph. Let's pick it up the story this morning in the 41st chapter, and I'm going to begin to read at verse 43. Listen to these words. Joseph, he was in charge of the entire country of Egypt. Pharaoh said to him, "I'm Pharaoh, but no one in Egypt will make a single move without your stamp of approval." So, Joseph took up his duties over the land of Egypt, and he was 30 years of age when he went to work for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. As soon as Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he began his work. I've entitled today's lesson, From Prison to Prosperity. The dictionary says that prosperity is to succeed and thrive in the condition of wealth. Joseph had just received from Pharaoh a signet ring that would give him all the credit to make credit charges throughout the land. Along with that signet ring, he was clothed in garments of fine linen. He received a golden necklace around his neck. And he was given a chariot, number 2 from the royal stable. Only a few hours before, Joseph was unbathed, unshaven, forgotten, as a prisoner in the dungeon. Now he was elevated to royalty. Joseph's faithfulness, when no one was looking, is finally going to pay off. When God determines the time is right, that's when we're elevated, but not before. Now, we're about to see some real gold. Joseph has been appointed, chosen, selected, prepared, and refined to be the new CEO of Pharaoh in the entire land of Egypt. Well, that nation was the United States in the ancient world. No other nation on earth had the splendor of that ancient country. Had been a place of remarkable influence, enviable education, military might, limitless wealth, strong middle class, powerful stock market, abundant farmland, and the best highways for transportation, strong laws governing fair jurisprudence of its people. And then to hear Pharaoh say to Joseph, verse 41 of chapter 41, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Plutarch, he was a historian and a philosopher in the 1st century in Rome. He said, "No beast is more savage than man when possessed with power." Through 13 years in Egypt, Joseph had been sold, promoted, and imprisoned. He experienced years of a nightmare existence, hardships, setbacks, frustrations. And Joseph isn't alone in that, being a young leader in Israel. King David, he was only 20 when he was anointed to the throne by Samuel the prophet. Daniel, he was a teenager when King Nebuchadnezzar appointed him to the high court in Babylon. Josiah, he was only 8 years old when he began to reign as king. The Virgin Mary was only a teen when she bore the Christ child. Spurgeon, 20 years of age, he took the pulpit at New Park Church in downtown London. G. Campbell Morgan, he was probably the greatest biblical expositor we had. And at the age of 23, he was called the Bible teacher of Great Britain. So, good things happen to young minds. Remember what Plutarch said, no beast is more savage than man when possessed with power. Well, now Joseph has power, but he's not a beast. Joseph has power, but he's not going to be a savage. Instead, Joseph at the age of 30 is going to receive three things from the king, Pharaoh. He's going to get a new name. He's going to get a new wife. And he's going to have two sons. That's my lesson today. That's what I want to talk about. And let's begin with he got a new name. In verse 45 of chapter 41 of Genesis, then Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name. He called him Zephanath. Zephanath. I wonder what that means. It means revealer of secrets. That's what the name means. Zephanath, revealer of secrets. I think that's pretty good. There's a famine coming. It's going to cover the whole world. It's going to be the COVID-19 pandemic of ancient Egypt. And there's going to be nobody left out. And every nation around it is going to get caught up in it the same as we did in that pandemic with COVID. People are going to die. However, Egypt has a vaccine. Do you know what it's called? Joseph. Zephanath. Revealer of secrets. He has a 7-year vaccine that's going to form silos. It's going to form granaries. It's going to form agricultural know-how. 7 years of plenty. Storing up 20% of the overflow crop. Every city, every village is going to have a warehouse full of grain, wagons, teams of horses, new highways, great transportation. Why? Because the revealer has said so. God had told Joseph what was coming. And he was preparing the nation of Israel and Pharaoh for that terrible Holocaust. He was going to be in charge of the entire country of Egypt, it says in verse 43. Now, during those 7 years of plenty, the people under Joseph's wise guidance began to organize. And a great administrative center was placed in place to organize. And the selling of grain was going to be their prime. And all the surrounding nations are going to come, and they're going to enjoy the prosperity that Joseph, Zephanath, has provided. Large complexes were built, including walled centers containing huge grain bins. There was only one entrance into that center with its system of storage bins. They looked like mini pyramids. Who did this? How did they get away with it? In ancient Egypt today, you can still see those silos deep into the ground. People didn't know what they were. Now they're beginning to figure it out. It was during the time of this Pharaoh where this man Zephanath, the keeper of the secret, knew how to store grain. This was the revealer of the secrets. And Joseph instilled his focus on that entire population. He probably was on the 6 o'clock news at night if they had such a thing. 7 years. He told his people, there's something coming and you have to be prepared. How were they going to be prosperous if that was coming? Stone silos built deep into the earth. It says in the biblical account, we learn that Joseph appointed men throughout the land of Egypt to oversee the gathering and the storing of the grain and other foodstuffs. That's verse 34. Joseph says, let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land and take up to 20% of the land as storage for those 7 years of plenty. Then you get down to verse 35, and let them gather all the feed and all the food in those good years that come, and lay up the grain under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Pharaoh believed Joseph, and he proved it by changing his name to Zephanath, the revealer of secrets. Remember, Joseph had given this plan to Pharaoh prior to his appointment as prime minister. And since it would be impossible for him to oversee the gathering and the storing of the entire country, we know that he was able to implement the plan. So, what does Pharaoh do? He lets the whole nation in, giving him a new name, Zephanath, and he told the nation of Egypt, we have a revealer of secrets because something is coming in 7 years, and you must listen to him. We also know that when the famine began and the Egyptians began to cry for food, they were told to go to Joseph and do whatever he said, which indicates he gave orders for the distribution of all the grain. In verse 55, and when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says to you, you do it. Verse 56, so the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt, and when the foreign peoples came to purchase grain, we learn that they went directly to Joseph. Zephanath. He'll help you out. The provider of secrets. He will take your money and he'll provide you with food. If you're a Christian and you're listening to me in this lesson, did you know that's your name? Your name is Zephanath too. You're a revealer of secrets. You've got things in this book called the Bible that no one else knows, because you know who's the revealer of secrets. Your Father in heaven. So when God tells you the secret of how to live your life, he wants you to share that with your neighbors and your friends and your family. He's the revealer of those secrets. And you being a follower of his, you have that authority to carry it out. Did you know that? Now, you're going to be criticized for it, but that's not going to change you. Respect comes from the inside. It's not the ring that you have on your finger that somebody gave you. It's not the expensive clothes you wear. It's not the gold chain you have around your neck. It's not the car you drive or the chariot that you were given as second in command. Integrity has a way of silencing its critics. Joseph's name, Zephanath, the revealer of secrets, is a very powerful tool. When things go wrong and you can't face your future without knowing what's happening, So what have you learned so far? Joseph got a new name. Now 2. Joseph gets a new wife. Question for you. How old were you when you got married? I was 24. Way back in 1964, we got married. Joseph, a little older than me. He was 30 years old when he got married. It says in verse 45, Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian wife. Her name was Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Now that's interesting. Asenath. She's only mentioned 3 times in the Bible. The next time that we hear her is over there in Genesis 46:20. It reads that to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born 2 boys, Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, daughter of the Potiphar, a priest of On, bore him. As the mother of Ephraim and the mother of Manasseh, Asenath becomes a matriarch for 2 tribes of Israel. Remember, there were 12 tribes? 2 of them are mentioned here in these because they're named after these 2 sons. They're going to head up 2 of the tribes of the 12 of Israel. One's Manasseh and the other's Ephraim. Don't you find that a bit strange? I do. The mother is a foreign faith. She belongs not to the Jewish bloodline. She enjoys a bloodline that's outside the Jewish faith. But she's going to form 2 new tribes of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And you know, class, I really like this lady. I'll tell you why. I find she's full of virtue and she's full of grace. A Jewish audience, if they were reading this story, are you going to let Pharaoh, they're thinking, give you a bride who isn't Jewish? Joseph, you're Jewish. She's not part of your heritage. Her father's a priest, but he's not a believer in Yahweh. The man's an idolater. That's what he does for a living. He lives in the city of On. Well, that is the idol country of the sun god. They worship the sun god, Re. The city of On was the headquarters for the sun god. Here was this young bride's dad who taught idolatry worship. So Joseph, watch out. But hang on a minute. Asenath has never been married before. She's still a virgin. Joseph comes on the scene. She has no other suitor. Not even Pharaoh's son catches her eye. She could have married him, I guess. Whose eye did she catch? Joseph. Who gave her away? Pharaoh. Wow. Asenath converts to the Jewish faith. Isn't that beautiful? But she does it by her name. Asenath. Isn't that amazing? Do you know what the word means? It means belong to. She belonged to Joseph. The Bible says in another part, you've probably read it, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. Do you know what the word cleave means? Glue. It means bonding. Have you ever studied plywood? You take 2 pieces of wood and you put them together and you glue them and bond them together and they form a laminate. And you can't take it apart. If you do, you destroy the board. That's what a marriage is, according to the Bible. A man shall leave his father and mother, and he shall bond together like a piece of plywood, and they can't be separated. Well, The word cleave is the same word as Asenath's wife. Name. Glue. Stick together. Means belong to. Asenath belonged to Joseph. That's one of the miracles, I think, when you read the story. And you look at your own miracle. How did God choose your partner? Have you ever looked back and thought about that? Well, that's the second thing that our story tells us. First, Joseph received a new name. Secondly, he received a wife who belonged to him, cleaved to him, and the two of them became one. That's good biblical mathematics. 1 plus 1 equals 1. What do you think of that? All right, thirdly, he has two boys. Verse 47. During the next 7 years of plenty in the land that produced a bumper crop in Egypt, Joseph gathered up the food of the 7 good years in Egypt, and he stored the food in silos in each city, and he stockpiled the surplus from the surrounding fields. Joseph collected so much grain, it was like sand on the ocean. And he finally quit keeping track. He had so much. Verse 50. Joseph, during that time, had 2 sons born to him in the years of famine. Asenath, his mother, called the one firstborn Manasseh. They had a second son, and they named him Ephraim. Now, don't overlook those names, because they have meaning. Do you want to know what their meanings were in the Hebrew? Now remember, Joseph gave them the name. Manasseh, his firstborn. It means forget. Manasseh means forget. When the second son was born, he was called Ephraim. Do you know what that name means? Prosperity. Manasseh, forget. Ephraim, prosperity. You can see where the names come from. Manasseh, forget. Think of all the hardship that Joseph endured, beginning with his family rejection all those years ago, and then all those false accusations, and he was imprisoned. Joseph wanted to forget. So he called his son Manasseh so that he would forget. Then comes Ephraim. Prosperity. God has prospered me in the land of my sorrow, said Joseph. Manasseh made me forget. Ephraim, God made me remember. Manasseh, forget. You know, Joseph could have been consumed with revenge. You've been stung. You know what it's like to be stung by others. Their evil deeds are dumped on you and blame you for what they did and what they got. When you hear our lesson, I want you to give birth to Manasseh. Ask the Lord to erase the stings in your memory. Bring about your own Manasseh. Forget. Learn to forget. When you do that, then you're going to give birth to Ephraim. You will then know that you have been abundantly blessed. Talk about how God made you forget. Paul said it too in Romans 5, verse 20. But where sin increased, grace abounded all the more, God has made me fruitful, said Joseph. Well, there's my lesson today. Joseph learned three things. One, he got a new name. Two, he received a beautiful wife. And three, from his wife came two lovely sons. From prison to prosperity. Come on back next week. Something very, very special is going to happen in our story. Do you remember we forgot all about his brothers back there in Canaan? Next week, they're going to show up again. What do you think Joseph's going to do? Well, you come and find out. I'll watch for you.